He is a lifelong Logan Square resident, and you want the microphone?
No, I'm good. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for staying. I'm the last up. So what I'd like to do is not a presentation so much. I think David Stovall killed it. I'm never going to go on after David Stovall. I knew that before, but it still was out of my hands. And of course, the testimony, Christian Diaz, very, very important to be personal as we talk about some of these things. I grew up on Sawyer and Fullerton, right down the block, in the 70s and 80s. We moved to Washtenaw, Alt Guild when I was a little kid. I was a teenager here, one of the only white kids on my block at the time, and had a really different experience of race. Also had experiences of affirmation of myself, singled out, taken aside when the police stopped me and other friends of mine who were Latino in ways that I found deeply shaming, very troubling, very mysterious, but also gave me a kind of consciousness about race that I've tried to share with other people throughout my lifetime. So for tonight, all I want to do is share with you guys some printed work that we're going to hand out. I want you to look at it. If you have something to write with and you can respond, that would be great. But it's a short exercise basically where we look at the ways that people talk about gentrification and what that says about race and class. Sir? Yeah, you guys can start handing them out, whoever's got them. So in groups of 5, that would help. So what I do for a living as a cultural anthropologist is I look at people's life histories, I do interviews with people, I studied gentrification as my major dissertation project. My master's, I looked at Logan Square, because I grew up here. My dissertation, I looked at Humboldt Park, Garfield Park, and Pilsen. And what I did was a little unusual. We looked at all the properties in all 3 neighborhoods. We scanned them for improvements. We loaded them into GIS files. We did a quantitative look, but then we did a real qualitative look. I did housing life histories of people. Did you ever talk about your life in terms of every single place you ever lived? It's a really certain, interesting kind of story. So I ended up with a project that was called When the White People Come, Gentrification Race According to Chicago. We can skip down. And I just want you to know, of course, here I am at Darwin School. Some of you saw this last week. Can you find the one white kid on the floor? That's, of course, my 6th grade photo. So next up is one of the quotes that some of you are going to see. So this is something I saw that was emblematic of my conversations with what I came to call white newcomers. That is, people who moved to a neighborhood that was majority Black or Latino within roughly the past 10 years. I saw something that followed this pattern quite a bit. They would first ask me, do you know what gentrification is? To some people it means upwardly white. To some people it means just plain white. Well, there were no whites living where I lived, okay? I would say the last 3 years on both sides of the street, now maybe there are 22 in a block of 100 people, okay? Minute counting is going on. Who lives where exactly? Do they have to be white for the area to change? No. I'd like to say it's more about economics. How many of you have heard yourself saying something like that? I don't want to sound racist because I'm not racist. Otherwise, why would I have moved in? Think of the brilliance in that statement. It's brilliant, and it's said over and over again nearly every single day from somebody to somebody who shares white privilege. It's something like this. Moral credentialing is what social psychologists call it. I did this one thing that 2 generations ago, people like me wouldn't have done. Therefore, whatever benefit I accrue, whatever money I gain out of this, whatever new environment that I reshape using my power and privilege is not my fault. So, this is just an example to start with. We talked with Latinos, of course, and Black folks, hablo español también. We would ask people, Latinos, what do they think of gentrification? ¿Cómo se siente sobre la gentrificación? People don't use that word. We would translate it the way it's used in Spain and other parts of Latin America. El emburguesamiento. People are asking, what is asking for a hamburger? What is it? People don't use that word either. We were like, los cambios del barrio, roughly changes in the neighborhood. And then finally, this woman in particular, her eyes lit up. She's like, oh, sí, cuando vienen los blancos. Because people understand the relationship of race and class. Even if they didn't go to college, if they've lived through the process for a generation or two, right? If they've seen this happen in Lincoln Park and Old Town and the near West Side and other neighborhoods they were pushed out of to come to here. And they've seen the process happen with their other relatives who've gone other places. So one more down, and then I'll stop talking. So this is my overall question. How does gentrification reveal and construct race in Chicago? And just briefly, if you look at the literature on gentrification, it's mainly about class. It started in a conversation in Britain among geographers about class, and mainly still kind of ignores race. There's a point, like a finger that goes, yeah, it seems to help these people and hurt these people. But that's just, because that's how income lines up with race. It's more than that. And it's structured by the ways that we talk. So if you take nothing away else from today, I want you to look at some of these sheets that you have in front of you. Hopefully you share the same quotes with the people who are next to you. So what we're going to do is have a 10-minute conversation. Just look at some of those things that you see. If you can jot down some notes there, that would be great. What I'd like you to look for is, what do you see going on here? How are people talking about gentrification in a way that is saying something else about race and class and how it informs this process? So we'll do that for a second. I'll stop talking. Please talk to each other, get to know each other, and then we'll kind of come back to it. Came in with, I hope you got to meet new people that you haven't met before. So what I'd like to do, just in the couple minutes we've got left, I know we're already at time and I appreciate you all staying here, is just to try to see if I could get one person, maybe from each group, who's looked at each of, it's roughly a dozen different quotes, and try to say if you could tell me something that you see there. And I'll give you a little teaser here. What you're doing is my passion. What you're doing is anthropology. This is what I spend my life geeking out about. How people talk, how they act, how they move, how they speak, and what that does to structure this larger structure. We've heard a lot about those conditions. Last time on Saturday, if you were there, we talked about the history of gentrification. And in the very first session of this whole series, we talked about some of the basic economic and political principles involved. But here, really, we get at the heart of a big question that is still part of the reason we keep getting this wrong. My larger argument is we are not quite seeing the forest for the trees here. Because essentially, we keep pointing other directions, away from the things that we do understand about structural racism in our society. Now, if you looked up gentrification and the word race on an academic search engine, you'd think you would find a bunch of articles and books about race and racism and how it's involved in gentrification. You will mostly find books about black gentrification. That's weird, right? You'd find books about Bronzeville in Chicago and Harlem in New York. You'd find lots of assertions that black people can gentrify black people, therefore it's not about race. That's tricky, all right? It's tricky and slippery. What people are saying now in anthropology and sociology and other things are, it's not either or, it's both and. And our task tonight and in the weeks and months and years to come as we organize is to see not how race or class better explain something, but how they seamlessly work together, right? So if I could just get, you're going to have to volunteer yourselves, if I could get one person who took on that very first quote we started with, do you know what gentrification is? Code name Jane Carey. I'm not going to put that person's real name up in front of you guys. I had to anonymize people against their will. That's a whole other story, because I don't want to make their lives horrifying. Jane Carey, who can take her on? Somebody have her quote. At least 5 of you have her quote. Somebody from one of those groups. This is what we're doing from now until the end. So,
not all of them got passed out.
oh really? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Minor, just still has some there. Okay. who got Enrique Salgado? There are a lot of Puerto Ricans who have this idea. They're eventually going back to Puerto Rico. Not that one either. That was a great one, by the way. Anybody got this one? Okay, so we started at the end. Get up. This one?
That's one.
Yeah, we got that.
Okay. Would somebody like to speak to this one? Yvette Rodriguez. Yeah, I can read it a little bit. I won't read the whole thing. I think the thing with class is like we're not as far removed, right, from like our experience of poverty. We've moved up so much that doesn't affect us. So there's like the same difference between like the black middle class and the poor blacks, and it's visual. I mean, the concepts to one another. It's still separate. You don't necessarily see that with Puerto Ricans and Latinos because the experience is still very much there. And then there's this idea that like all of our families still reflect all of that. You know what I'm saying? Like some of us may have made it, right? But for the most part, we still have the drug addict uncle, the alcoholic one. You know, like all of it still being a reality and still continuing in our community. What's going on with race and class here? Let's speak to this.
I was one of the people that got this particular quote. And after thinking about it a while, it seemed like there was a conflict between, even if you become middle class and you're a minority, you still want to identify with your nationality, but oftentimes that brings in negative stereotypes about the minority, the alcoholic uncle or whatever, in their mind. And also that as you get older, you want that sense of community around you, and that sometimes is in conflict with, you know, the community you're actually living in and how you see yourself fitting into that community. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my...
Yeah, no, that's definitely there. What else do you want to add to that? Anything?
Well, we talked about it, we felt that this person, the way that it was written was struggling with these issues.
Yeah, you can
In
hear
her
the
mind,
hesitance
she
in the
was
voice.
sort of like, well, I'm going to say this, but then this, and you know, it was almost as if she was right in the interface between generations and between different experiences within her own life of class and ethnicity.
You can feel the tension there between, yes, some of us have made it, but some of us still have not. And we're tied to this community that has historically been painful for many of us. And yet, if we leave it, we're leaving a piece of ourselves behind. It's a different set of issues, right? They're still revolving around class, but also race and ethnicity. So let's move on to some of the other ones. And there's some that are particularly striking because they're by real estate developers, other folks like that. For example, this person, I love it when I would interview a real estate developer who had no idea I grew up here. And I would never say I grew up here because then they would be like, oh, you're an informant, which I am. So they would try to explain it to me from the beginning. This particular guy could not come up with enough violent metaphors for Logan Square in the 70s and 80s. He was like, it was Beirut, it was Iraq, it was all this stuff. And I was like, it was where I played in the playground. So what's going on here? He's talking about the architectural integrity. He's talking about he's a developer, he takes a risk. It's inevitable. You ever heard that one? A process that displaces people. Sometimes taking responsibility for it, sometimes not. Who would like to deal with this one? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like that particular line, he said that I have been responsible for displacing poor people in the past, and now I want to be responsible for keeping them here. So like, I feel like he's kind of saying that, that he has this power to keep people here. I don't want to do it anymore, even though like
God,
I've done it in the past. But then at the end, he's kind of saying, but it's inevitable. It's America. Change is gonna happen. So it's kind of like this contradiction of like, I do have a power, but then again, I really don't, because it's just gonna be like, it's just a natural process. And then I feel like he also kind of like almost tries to justify himself or like himself or herself by saying, well, we have never thrown out a good for working family. So like,
What is that, right? There's the good, deserving poor, and then there's the undeserving poor who deserve to be kicked out because one of them has ever taken drugs or something, right? Drug use is higher among white newcomers to Logan Square than it is among Latinos in Logan Square. Did you know that? So, who is the deserving poor? Who is the undeserving poor, right? That's huge. But you see him also, not exactly with attention, because he seems very confident, but living within this contradiction, right? Sort of saying, I have the power, and if I decide to put a moral, ethical component to that, I can decide to. But it doesn't matter because it's inevitable. So something that is definitely socially produced is constantly called inevitable. Something that he has made sure happens, he's telling other people, just happens like the rain. This is one of the ones that broke my heart. This is not in Logan Square. Tamara Griffin and her husband Arthur spoke to me in Garfield Park. And they spoke right at a time in which gentrification seemed not to be happening. After being trumpeted for many years, East Garfield Park was supposed to be the next destination. Did you guys know that? Chicago Magazine declared it. Everyone's going to East Garfield Park. It's got 2 huge train lines running right through it. It's got the highway right there. It's got a huge park. It's got old, beautiful architecture. It's got empty lots you can buy up for nothing. Why not Garfield Park? Because white people are terrified of that. One thing Tamara Griffin, black woman, said revolved around, I hate to say it this way, but it's just the truth of the matter, unless enough Caucasian folk continue to move in and continue to join with those of us who have an interest in the neighborhood and demand certain things, it's gonna revert back. And she talks about her inability to get basic city services. They put on that block the first white woman who moved in, and they put her at the head of the block club. They made her president without her request. This broke my heart. What does it say about race in America and class? Who took this one? Go for it.
Leave it over here. I mean, like you said, there's a sense of powerlessness. I mean, the assumption that's underneath it seems to me to be that, I mean, she's flat out saying it, that white people have more leverage and influence. She talks about, you know, that black people wouldn't ever say my steak wasn't cooked the right way, and because they have no effect, that no one would care. And so she seems to be a certain reality in her mind that they need white people to get things they need because they'll never get it on their own. They have no leverage. Even when they have no effect to change anything.
Right. You want to add something to that?
I think there's an undertone of fear because there isn't a collective in the community. She thinks that because there isn't a collective, everyone's too scared or that no one's on the same page. So it needs someone from outside to come in to cause some type of change.
Is it a justified fear, or are you saying that maybe it isn't?
I'm saying that maybe it's like a hopelessness type of fear. That's not necessarily justified, it's not justified. It's saying it's hopeless because she's probably been in the community for such a long time. She's seen a lot. It's just
It's like a feedback loop, right? So she's acknowledging that there's not enough in the community that they're having a singular voice, but that's sort of twofold, right? It's because there's that fear that even if there's the voice, there's not going to be any action. So then that beats down to why you bother to have a voice if there's not going to be that. So it's this feedback.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that struck me was if I were white, since I teach English, like it's non-real conditional. If I were rich, that's what I teach my students, but you're not, and you're probably not gonna be.
Right.
So I asked him, like, did you ever say if I were black or if I were Latino? So it's like this juxtaposition of like the unreal conditional of if only, but.
Right. So is this a reality? Do we trust Tamara Griffin? If so, what does it say about our basic provision of services that are supposed to be equally guaranteed to everybody throughout the city? And if this is true, this is one of the reasons people promote gentrification. They say, look, it's going to be better for the rest of you all if people who look like me are there. And if that is literally actually the case, how can we argue against gentrification, right? This is how some of those inevitabilities come to be, because we have created this as a reality. And I can tell you of another 3 people who had fried chicken with me, formed a little focus group at a barbecue joint on Madison Street, and talked about struggling for years to have a stop sign put in across the street from a school where people zoomed down the street on Madison and kids had to cross to go to school every day. One little girl finally got killed, unfortunately. And they still couldn't get that stop sign. They did marches and protests. They went downtown and took a whole group there. Took all my notes down. I went home and I was like, this is horrible. How come people here can't get anything from the city? And by weird chance, I ended up interviewing a couple across the street, a white couple, who told the story of that same thing. And they said, oh yeah, we called the Alderman and they took care of it in like a week. And I went to that corner and there was a stop sign there. Now again, is it magic? Is it because white people have powers that are based inside of us? No, they're based in, of course, the society around us. Now I want to skip down because I know we're way over time. Now let's just look through one more and then we'll adjourn. And again, my purpose here isn't to make you all feel terribly depressed. I want to say one thing before we go, which is that next time around is an entire panel just on solutions. We're going to talk about specifically what does it take, now that we have all this knowledge, to decide to create a different society. Now, Janet Creswell was that other white woman across the street, and she tells the story of walking down the street and a black woman comes out and says, $10,000, $10,000. She says, what? That's what I tell my neighbors. Every one of you that comes into this neighborhood ups our property rate $10,000. Now she's just saying this to a white couple who's walking down the street, right? What is really going on in this interaction? Who handled this one? Anybody get one? Yeah, in back.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, first and foremost, it's almost it's an automatic deeming of something positive as opposed to come. But on the flip side, what we're supposed to assume when we talk about was that the individual who's telling the story is assuming the individual are homeowners.
Right.
Which are not, and maybe those are very majority are not. And then with that, she points out, she tells her African American neighbors what isn't wrong really with this entire vote, but I guess it's the case with all the votes. The idea though is that it's supposed to up your property taxes, but who is it really benefiting when you are barely able to afford the rent that you are currently paying right now? That's if you're renting. And then furthermore, if you do own your home, you are struggling to either pay your mortgage or get subbed into a loan mortgage, whatever the case may be, then it is further leaving you as a whole.
Right.
And it's further, it's funny, she uses it as a positive, but for those individuals who are the pioneers in those neighborhoods who have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, it will not benefit them. Regardless of what they think about schools might get better or stop signs might get put up, it won't benefit those individuals.
If they can't afford to live there, right?
We still have passage, we still have an economical issue that, are you making enough and are you able to afford this?
Right. Yeah. Anybody want to add to that? What do you think about, forget about whether or not that's true, where just the presence of white people causes that change. I'm arguing this in my dissertation, which hopefully will be a book next year. Keep your eyes out for it when the white people come. But it's arguing that the actual change to what is called the built environment, the constructed actual world, has less to do with raising property value than the speculation wave. And how you generate the speculation wave in a segregated city merely has to do with the presence of whites. That itself shows you race and class in some fascinating ways. But just as an interpersonal interaction, what is this black woman really doing besides saying, hey, it's cool that you're here? What else is she saying? Yeah.
It's right away because it monetizes people.
Yeah.
But it equates money with a human being. What do you think?
It says, your whiteness does this, right? Sure. Turns them into a commodity also.
But you hear the opposite also.
Yeah.
At times you know, we don't like human beings out there that.
Right, by the same equation. The same equation that we created in the 40s, 50s, and 60s through redlining and white flight now operates in the other direction. It's got the same polarity of white and non-white, but now it can be used to reevaluate land, right? It occurred to me, and I wrote about this, that she's doing something else here that I think is brilliant, actually. She's approaching these perfect strangers, and she's saying, I know how weird that is. Why would she need to interject this to a complete stranger? She's saying basically, you and I both know that doesn't make any sense. You're not actually improving this neighborhood just by walking down the street. So if you can be here and I can up my rate $10,000, clearly we are living in an unjust system. You buy it? I don't know. It's my interpretation. So, I know Amy probably wants to wrap up. I'll just stop there. I want you to take those things home with you. It's the first taste of something that's going to come out hopefully in more published form. But keep in mind, as people are talking and as you're engaging in these conversations too, a lot is going on. People are naturalizing things. They're speaking with colorblind racism. They're activating overt racism and then denying it. They're doing a lot of work to make this project happen. And just like David Stovall said, anything that we put that much work into do, we can also undo, right? So thanks very much.